We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Deep in my heart, I do believe that we shall overcome someday. And we'll walk hand in hand. We'll walk hand in hand. We'll walk hand in hand. One day. Deep in my heart, I do believe that we'll work hand in hand one day. And we'll break down the prison walls. We will tear down those prison walls. Together we will tear down the prison walls on that day. Deep in my heart, I do believe that we will tear down all those prison walls on that day.
I think we'll just go for a little bit longer while people are coming in.
We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Deep in my heart, I do believe that we shall overcome someday. And we'll walk hand in hand. We'll walk hand in hand. We'll walk hand in hand. One day. Deep in my heart, I do believe that we'll work hand in hand one day. And we'll break down the prison walls. We will tear down those prison walls. Together we will tear down the prison walls on that day. Deep in my heart, I do believe that we will tear down all those prison walls on that day.
I think, are we ready to begin? I think so.
Is Fanan here?
I'm going to leave that up to Margie to wrangle. Just let me know.
Okay.
So I want to welcome.
Fanon is in, excuse me, but he's under Fred Nagel.
That's
Great.
fine.
Okay.
Ellen, did you get that?
Yeah, that's wonderful. I'm glad to hear it. I want to welcome everyone to our panel today. This is the panel on equal rights for all, resisting settler colonialism and white nationalism in the US, in Northern Ireland, and in Palestine. It's really a pleasure to see so many people here, and I want to thank you all for coming. I want to let everybody know that this event is going to be recorded, and it will be posted to both the Middle East Crisis Response and Jewish Voice for Peace Hudson Valley websites. So if you have an issue with that, you should be aware that it's going to be recorded. And if you want to turn off your video, I think you'll feel free, but it's always great when people leave it on and our speakers can see the reaction of the audience. I want to thank the sponsoring groups, Middle East Crisis Response, Jewish Voice for Peace Hudson Valley, Veterans for Peace New York City, Women in Black New Paltz, for helping us get this together. And I'd like to give you just a short bio of all of our speakers. I think that we're really excited to actually try to think about the international solidarity that comes from understanding the role of settler colonialism in the struggles that people have for justice and equal rights in various places around the world. So we have 3 speakers today. It only begins to represent the beginnings of a discussion about the issue, but we're happy to try to bring these 3 together. From our local area, we have Fanon Fraser, who's a staff community organizer with Citizens Action Hudson Valley. He's located in Kingston, and he's been involved in that organization's gentrification work on immigrants' rights organizing, police reform, and much, much more. Kingston has been the site of a very vibrant coalition of community organizations that have come together in support of these efforts. Our second speaker is going to be Jim Keyes, who's a filmmaker, a cultural activist, and a guerrilla muralist from Derry, Northern Ireland, and he's a fighter for environmental justice. He's facilitated the Bloody Sunday March commemoration this year in solidarity with the struggles of Palestinians and Black Lives Matter activists. And the third speaker is Mazen Pomsia, who is a Palestinian scientist, the founder of the Palestine Museum of Natural History and the Palestine Biodiversity Institute. He's published many scientific papers. He's an internationally known social justice advocate, and he's deeply involved in the struggle for Palestinian liberation. And you can read about his work on his website. So I think with that, I would like to go ahead. I'll tell you how we'd like to take questions. We'd like people to be muted during the presentations, and we'd like to take questions in the chat. So if you have questions, please put them in the chat. And then we'll get to them after people have spoken. They're going to speak for maybe 10, 15 minutes each, and then we'll go to questions. And then I was going to say that I've introduced the panelists, so we'll begin with Fanon, and then he can just pass the microphone, I guess is the right word, on to Jim, and Jim can pass it on to Mazen. So please, Fanon, go ahead and tell us, give us your thoughts. We're waiting to hear them.
Sorry, what is the question? Are we just, is this just a general?
Yeah, I think just begin, if you can, by talking a little bit about the struggle for justice, social justice, and equal rights for all in your work.
So I've been with Citizen Action about 2 years now. And I think it really came to a climax after Ahmaud Arbery was lynched by 2 self-proclaimed vigilantes in, what is it, York, Georgia. And I think that's the name. And on a very personal level, Ahmaud Arbery reminded me of my best friend growing up in Albany, New York, where I spent most of my childhood. And I woke up one morning, looked at the newspaper and saw his face. And I realized that Ahmaud Arbery resembled my best friend growing up in Albany. And at that point, you know, because I was an organizer, I felt compelled to just organize and to organize a march. So organized a walk for Ahmaud Arbery. And it was small, it was about 35 people because this was still before George Floyd. So it wasn't resounding yet in the public conscience. I think that wake-up call hadn't happened yet. So it was a small march, but it was a powerful march. And anyway, I guess my point is that it didn't explode, it didn't boil over with the rest of America until George Floyd. At which point me and Ann Ames, who I'm not sure if she's with us, co-founded the Wednesday Walk for Black Lives here in Kingston, which Ann Ames still carries the mantle on. But it's the fact that there wasn't a larger, wider outcry over Ahmaud Arbery, and it wasn't until George Floyd. It took that much. It took that much to desensitize. And coming to the question of what I feel about your question is that desensitization. I think that's the main, that's the main thing in all this, because it's because of the normalization, and that's my main. But I'm going to stop there and pass it because I don't want to talk too much. But for me, the most dangerous thing is the desensitization. I guess I'll pass it to Jim. You're muted, Jim.
You passed it to me quicker than I expected there. Yeah, well, if I picked up on that, maybe if I just picked up on the desensitization, like the whole thing I was preparing, which I'm glad I don't have to speak to now. But since I got involved, like I came into environmental justice. I see myself now as a bridge between environmental justice and social justice, and one of the things that really took me in environmental justice was the work of Joanna Macy. And Joanna Macy talks about the fact that we live in 3 stories. In the West, we live in one of 3 stories. the business as usual story, which is that everything's fine. We've got a bit of a COVID thing going on now. There's a bit of unrest in the Black community, Black Lives Matter. All that's going to get sorted out, and we're going to make some concessions there, and everything will be fine, and we'll get back to business as usual. And we can, you know, if you're smart, you'll even make money. In this out of this crisis, and then there's the great unraveling. So if you're listening to mainstream politicians, whether it's the Democrats or the Republicans in the States, you're going to get that sort of business as usual story. If you're listening to the science, you're in the great unraveling story, and you're going, you know, we're destroying the planet, and there's nothing we can do because nobody's listening to us, and we're in a desperate state. And then the third story that Joanna posits is what she calls the Great Turning, and that's and what's different about the Great Turning is that in the first two stories, we're abstract individuals who have a sense of identity, whether it's a Catholic in Northern Ireland, a Black person in the United States, or a Palestinian in Palestine, where you're in a situation, whether you're in the occupied territories or within the state of Israel, you're this second-class entity, or even lower than second class, and all these identities have been given to us, inscribed in us, and we kind of act from them, and we act quite often in the way we act. We are circumscribed to actually almost get in our own way with the changes we want to see, because our imagination has been colonized by the situation we're in. But in the third story, in the Great Turning, we see ourselves as part of everything. This is our world. We are not separate from nature. We're part of and integral to nature. And a big part of, there's three pieces to the work. There's stopping the things, holding operations, as she calls it, in the Great Turning, holding operations to stop and try to keep what's left of life support systems alive, stop any more environmental degradation. Also deal with social justice issues, deal with the care of people who are not being cared for in the system, stand against the people who are treated with injustice. So stand against all the injustices, but at the same time, work to create a life-sustaining society, to build a life-sustaining culture. And so and then the third element, the third pillar of the Great Turning is to do what, in a way, where you left off there, Fana, which is to actually nurture the wellspring of caring and compassion that's in us all, that is actually smothered in the business as usual culture. And as she says in one of her statements, the heart that breaks open can contain the whole world. And basically that's the kind of work I see. I want, that's where I want to come from now. I want to come from being the change I want to see, not enemyizing people, realizing that we have been separated from each other through colonialism, through racism, through capitalism, class structures, and actually starting to imagine, there's good things. I point to, I'll not say I'm doing all this, I'll just point to the things that I see as very positive things. There's the Transition Towns movement. That's a brilliant piece of work by Rob Hopkins, saying, unleashing the power of the imagination to create the future we want. So, we actually have great creativity in us, no matter how desensitized we've become. And it's a matter of trying to find things that are empowering targets for us while we're fighting against racism, colonialism, the indifference of the system, but start building the structures at the same time. There's a great book here. I just got it by Emma Dabry on what white people can do next in relation to Black Lives Matter. And it's again, it's and of course Greta Thunberg is one of my leaders, because she's really clarifying that the great turning is where we see ourselves in a power with structure with others, and we're part of a power with movement. It's rising against the power over structures that are separating us and colonizing us and dividing us against ourselves even. And so the great turning is a turning towards self-love as well as everything else, where we stop beating ourselves up and we actually just start doing it. And one of the things that we're saying in Derry about our movement for zero waste and living within the Earth's carrying capacity is we don't actually know what we're doing, we're just doing it. And you know, more people are joining us, and we're just at the beginning of something. But the key thing I said in a talk I did on this year's Bloody Sunday was, besides wasting our time, not wasting our time, but besides demanding justice from a lockdown injustice system that's never got hasn't got the capacity to give us justice, we have to start creating justice at the same time. We have to start being careful with what we do with our power and start to create justice, start to open our imaginations and actually be the change we want to see. So that's my contribution, I think, to kick us off.
Hello, everybody. I'm talking to you from Bethlehem, and greetings to you all. Happy Easter to those of you who celebrated it. The Western traditions, we also have Eastern Christians coming soon with Easter. Of course, you know, the subject is very, very important. And I say that humanity now is facing a really tough choice. There's actually a clock I just put on our Palestine Action for the Planet. The clock shows that we have about 6.5 years before we have irreversible damage that will accelerate in terms of climate change. So we are really in deep trouble as a species. As maybe when Linnaeus named us Homo sapiens, he was a bit optimistic that we will be at some point sapiens. But anyways, I mean, what we see in the world is really tough. I mean, we can paint a very, very dark scenario if you want. There's risks of nuclear war even starting soon. There, even today as we speak, there was a cyber attack on the nuclear facilities in Iran, which Iran is blaming Israel on. It's all over the news here in the Middle East, but of course in the Western countries, these things are shoveled under the carpet and nobody talks about them. We have many challenges in climate change, of course, and environmental degradation and human-induced habitat destructions. We have the challenge of war and impoverishment. Yemen, for example, thanks to the US, Israeli, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates attack on that country, basically millions are threatened with starvation. Already so many hundreds of thousands of children have died in that attack on Yemen. And the reason they attack Yemen, of course, is because it's in a strategic location that the US and Israel and those countries want to maintain control of the Red Sea trade. And then we have some other things like what happened in the Suez Canal, which may have been deliberate, we don't know. But there's talk now creating another canal that connects the Mediterranean to the Red Sea via Israel, which would give Israel more leverage on international commerce. They already have a lot of leverage. We have, of course, the COVID-19 pandemic that already claimed the lives of so many millions of people and caused so many to suffer and a collapse of the economies. here in Palestine, actually, we face a very, very difficult situation because as a percentage of our population, I think we're number 2 or 3 in the world, per number of people affected per million people of COVID-19. And of course, we have the colonialism, settler colonialism and racism, which, has been kind of contained in many parts of the world. Just about every country on earth had settler colonialism and associated racism associated with it. And many countries are still suffering from it. I think this notions of supremacy and, chosen people and whites in the US or Jewish Israelis as God's chosen people or whatever, Nazis, these notions have never dissipated really. They remain under the surface, and we saw them bubble up, so to speak, with the populist right-wing governments elected in places like Brazil, India with Modi, US with Donald Trump, many other countries, of course, and now even in France, Le Pen seems to be gaining over her rivals. These populist movements bubble up because there's that undercurrent of racism that we inherited from the colonial systems. I lived in the US for 28 years, and I tell you, I saw it so vividly, the discrimination and the racism. There's the US that is publicized around the world as this country, superpower, economic superpower, etc. But the reality is under the surface inside the US, there is so much racism, and it's easily transferable, between, let's say, blacks to Hispanics to Arabs to Muslims to whatever, or switch back depending on the mood of Hollywood and the media that's controlled in the US to serve these interests that are out there. And I could go on, but of course I will depress you, and and we need to say something more positive and more proactive what we do. It's a state of the world, and my background is medical genetics, and we say this is like diagnosis. You can look at diagnosis, what's a diagnosis and what's the symptoms of a diagnosis, all good, and it's important, and I say to, good physicians should make good diagnosis. For example, the diagnosis here is not Israeli occupation of the areas of 1967, the West Bank and Gaza. No, the diagnosis here is settler colonialism and racism that's inherent in that system of settler colonialism, which has to be dismantled. And I don't mince any words when I say I don't believe Israel has a right to exist as a country, as a state, whatever. No racist country has a right to exist. We have to always think about people. People, Israelis, of course, have a right to exist, and they're welcome to exist with us, and we live together, and we can live together. It's not a problem. But we should dismantle the structure of racism that is inherent in the colonial system that we have inherited from the Ben-Gurions and the Herschels of the world. The same in the US. I think the US has to dismantle the inherent racism that it inherited from slavery, which I tried to basically gloss over. I mean, it's shocking to me that they have in Washington, D.C., a US government-funded memorial museum for the Holocaust of Jews in Europe, but they don't have a memorial museum for the genocide of Native Americans or of the black slaves that they had killed in the millions and millions of people. I think we need to have a reckoning with our history. As I'm an American citizen, so I say my history also there. As we have to have a reckoning with our history here in this country, which is Palestine. It's a country that's very important, and I think it's important because, like South Africa during the time of apartheid, it provides the Achilles heel of Western hypocrisy. When the Western governments, Europe, North America, US, Canada, and Western countries in general, including Australia and others, they speak of human rights, they speak of international law, but their governments are pretty much, as you know, set in a way that serves a very, very narrow clique of interests in those countries, and those interests control the systems of the leverages of the politics in those countries. Hence, you see, by the way, and it's not surprising at all, that today, like less than 10 individuals actually own more wealth than half the world population. This is remarkable in human history. Never been so bad in terms of inequality, if you want. So, okay, if this is the diagnosis and the symptoms, what is the prognosis and what's the therapy for this? Well, the therapy has always been so very obvious to anybody who studies history. If you look even in the US, since I mentioned the US, what are the positive things that happened in the United States in the past 200, 300 years? You should read Howard Zinn's book, for example, A People's History of the United States. The positive things that happened because enough people got up and pushed those stupid, fucking, sorry my language, politicians to do the right thing, not because we elected a particular politician or a particular party. It has never been like that. It's always you have to pressure. Without pressure, these politicians don't do anything. Well, it's not they don't do anything. They actually do a lot to support their greedy supporters. The lobbies, like the Israel lobby in Washington, or the gun lobby, or the military-industrial complex lobbies. That's who they support because that's who gives them the money. So what they do is they stick their finger in there and they wait to see where the wind is blowing so that they can go with it. And what we have to do is give them a hurricane to get them to do the right thing. This happened, for example, in Western countries when we got the women's right to vote, for example, or when we got civil rights, or when we got 40-hour work week, or when we got unions and support for unions, or any of that, social security and so on. Or ending wars, like ending the war in Vietnam, which dragged on for so many years, killing so many millions of people. It was the pressure of the people who made the changes that are necessary. And this is just an example from the US, and you could cite examples in Ireland and Europe, many other things where things happen because of pressure from the common people who are fed up with the system. That pressure, I wrote a book called Popular Resistance in Palestine, A History of Hope and Empowerment, which talks about the popular resistance here and how it is a line for good, for activism, for change, if you want. And it's incremental. It is a marathon. It's not a sprint. We shouldn't feel discouraged. We must keep going. And I say we must keep going because it's the only choice for us. The other choice, by the way, which is to do like 95% of the people, which is to go along and just do our jobs in life, get a job, get a house, eat, drink, go have a party. The apathy, we know what it does to human population. We saw what it did in Nazi Germany. We saw what it did in many other places with oppression and genocide and so forth. So apathy is not a choice. Joining the ranks, because apathy, actually, you are joining the ranks of the oppressors in situations of injustice, as somebody had said. Not doing anything is choosing the side of the oppressor. So what you have to do, you can either go join the oppressors if you like, or you can be apathetic, which is essentially joining a side of the oppressor, or you can resist. These are your choices. And each of us has to make that choice. And I think, when every day here we face difficult choices in Palestine. I mean, just yesterday, a kid who's 11 years old was shot in the eye, lost his eye. He was standing, actually the video shows he was standing, not doing anything inside the marketplace. They released a guy from prison after, just yesterday also, they released a guy from prison after 17 years, essentially, of solitary confinement. He is not, he's psychologically so damaged that even when his mother visited him in jail, he didn't recognize her. He told her to get the hell out of there. He's just totally lost his mind. This guy used to be a brilliant guy. After so much torture, that's what happens to you. So we all face these choices. We all have difficulties to deal with life as it is and what it offers to us. I can tell you that it is a rewarding life to live a life of activism. It is rewarding in the sense that, you don't wait for people to say thank you to you. I rarely hear anybody say thank you to me or anything like that, and I don't care. It is the reason we do it is because we can look ourselves in the mirror and say, these lemmings are heading off the cliff. And I am one of those lemmings who's standing by and saying, hey guys, you're going the wrong direction. You're gonna go off the cliff. And we have to do it. We really have to do it. There's no other choice. If we succeed, great. Then maybe, after we're dead, they'll say, oh, these guys tried something, succeeded. If we don't succeed, which is a possibility, by the way, I would say 50-50 chance for humanity. If we don't succeed, what happens? We all are doomed. Even the greedy people, the multi-billionaires are doomed. Their children will not have a planet to live on. They will not have nature. There will be more plastic in the ocean in a few years than there is fish in the ocean. Basically, it's doomed for all of us. So we speak truth to power, and we push it, and we push it. And each of us has to decide how much risk they want to take, how much pushing the envelope they want to do, and that goes up to us. Some of us risk it all. Not me, actually. I have lost 19 friends of mine who got killed by the Israelis since I came back to Palestine in 2008. Those guys sacrificed. Those guys sacrificed their life, I sacrificed very little, and I hope I have the courage to sacrifice more, and that's all I have to say, that we really need to get our act together, and the more we can connect these struggles. So I commend you on the connectivity of the US, Northern Ireland, Palestine, but I would say all over the planet, it's one planet, one blue ball, if you want. There's no borders from space, and we have to really get our act together. Thank you.
think Fanon had a bit more to add.
Oh, I realized I was a little too brief earlier. For the sake of others speaking, and but I think I can hold my peace for now, so you can proceed with questions.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, well, I think we'll put everybody up on the screen so that we can have a discussion, because I think that would be really where we want to go from here. And I do have some questions for you. I think one of the things that maybe people would like to respond to is when you take a look at the parallels, if you can, of the colonial impact of Europeans in North America, the impact of the British in Ireland, and the impact of the Zionists in Palestine. So let's see if we can see what some of the common elements are here and maybe what some of the differences are. And I leave it up to any of you wish to start. So, because you're just unmute yourself, Jim, so you can participate in the conversation.
I think Fanon should take this.
Pardon me? You want me to pick you? Okay.
No, I said Fanon would be good.
Then we'll start with Fanon. Yeah.
All right. The parallels. Yeah, there's so many, I guess. So in 2005, I did The Birthright, Israel. My mother's Ashkenazi Jewish, father's Black American. And I hesitated because I was going to City College in Harlem, New York City, Manhattan at the time, and there was some conflict between some Israeli students with a very pro-Zionist message and others, kind of protesting, more free Palestine, anti-apartheid message, but I ended up going. I ended up going on this trip, and it was a very contentious trip for me. I felt very much a propaganda tour, and during that trip, we went. We entered a gift shop at one point, and I'm not exactly sure where it was, but we entered a gift shop. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with birthright trips, but the whole time we had 2 soldiers with AK-47, Israeli soldiers, of course. And I was the only brown or, Black person there in this trip. And certain things felt very familiar to me in this trip, certain situations. One situation, for instance, we had exited a gift shop. For some reason, the exit of the gift shop kind of let out into this small Arab quarter. I'd have to look at a map to recall the name of the town, but there's some boys playing soccer there, some young kids, probably about my son's age, no more than 8 years old. And I remember, like one of the kids in my group, well, first off, it was very cute. They all came up to me and they wanted to see my postcards. And of course, I couldn't speak any Arabic, and their English was not very good, but I said Michael Jackson, and they all started doing Michael Jackson dances. And it was beautiful. It was great. It was a great moment. And one of the other travelers on my trip called me the ambassador, which was kind of awkward. But then one other American Jews traveling to Israel, they had an I Love New York t-shirt. And this male decided to try to play soccer with these kids. And at one point they felt he was being the word colonialist minded would be too strong, but there was definitely a gearing up, because of the context of this trip, not only going from kibbutz to kibbutz or whatever, but because it was a propaganda chore, and they were obviously trying to build the population as well as the military there. And I know this one individual did want to join the military. And so at one point, he tried to play soccer with these young kids, these young boys, and they started kicking the ball at his head. and they became aggressive, they became hostile, because I realized they recognized in this American something similar to what they felt in the occupiers. They felt an aggression and a kind of that false paternalism that comes with colonialism. And at one point he wanted to make up, so he took the t-shirt off his back and tried to give it to these boys. They stamped it into the ground, they spit on his shirt. And it was totally an act of rebellion. And I recognize that also because I've seen things because in the United States, there's also often, to get to my point, it's a long story, but to get to my point, there's that natural rebellion that's going to happen in the culture of disenfranchised, marginalized, oppressed people. And there's a natural, there is that natural rebellion, but at this, yeah, okay. Let me try to wrap this up. But the parallels that were felt there with the United States, it was just very familiar in terms of the resistance and the instinct to resist, but also the instinct on my group's part, because everyone called the kids monsters after this, and they were savages, and they were this and that, and I had to speak up, of course, because for obvious reasons, right? And there was that, but I think that was part of going back to desensitization. The majority of the group didn't recognize what was wrong with this situation. The majority of this group of white Jewish Americans did not recognize what was wrong with this situation. They couldn't see it. I mean, this is a ghetto outside of a suburban Israeli town, backside of a gift shop, and not one American Jew who I was traveling with recognized what was wrong. And when I spoke up, after this experience, I was pretty much an outcast from the group. I was pretty much ignored largely and widely. And it's part of that desensitization, because the fact that we were coming into these people's land, and this one individual who tried to play soccer with them, the fact that he didn't recognize the oppression that he was extending from the United States, but also from the occupiers, of Palestinian lands. Just the fact that we don't see that, and the desensitization, going back to the United States, we see it all the time. Again, going back to Ahmaud Arbery, it didn't take, I mean, this person was killed for jogging, very bright, brilliant person, murdered in the street for jogging. And then George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and everyone before and after that point. But it took George Floyd and this boiling over for Americans to see, for the world to see, but mostly Americans. And just one more point, and then I will wrap it up. Can I say one more thing, Felice?
Sure.
After I left the Birthright tour, I had a friend who, an Israeli friend there, and I stayed with them for a few weeks, or for a week, closer to Haifa, northern. And then they passed me off to a lieutenant in the Israeli military. This lieutenant, his name was Sadit. He happened to, and he had olive skin as well. And he was a lieutenant, but he was on his off duty, and he worked as a coffee delivery person. So we drove around all over Haifa, drinking very strong coffee and smoking Nobilis cigarettes for a week, and getting into a lot of arguments. And by the end of this trip, I respected him as just a soldier. as a soldier, carrying out his duty, his due diligence, protecting the loftiness of an idea, and the loftiness of an idea, but then the desensitization comes back into it, because it's the inability to recognize the slaughter and the atrocity that's carried out on another people in the name of the difference of complexion, religion, so forth, background, so forth. And the desensitization that we experience in the United States is virtually the same. It's virtually the same because we witness it every day. We know it exists, but we stomach it, but we tolerate it. But that vicarious trauma okay, I'm sorry, I'm going to yield. This is a long conversation, but I'm going to pass the mic.
Yeah, Jim.
Can I pick up on what you're talking about, Fannin? Like, I one of my big kind of spiritual leaders has been Eric Fromm, and Fromm talks about social character, and besides us having an individual character, we have the character of a social group, and that character basically gets us to do what we have to do to survive, and to also ignore what we have to ignore to be part of the group. And there's a kind of way in which, I mean, one of the things when I talk about this idea of being the change we want to see, we are listening for the world, and when we are given this idea of having a birthright, whether it's a Jewish birthright or a white birthright, or then we don't see. We aren't listening for what you saw that they couldn't see. You are listening for that, so you saw it. We actually edit out. There's a kind of little video you can do online where you're asked to count how many times someone passes the ball, and you're busy counting how many times the people in the white shirt pass the ball to the other people in the white shirts. You're so busy counting that you don't notice a gorilla or a woman with an umbrella walking through the group, because you're not listening for how many times the ball is counted. And that's how we've been socialized. So this idea of being the change we want to see, we have to create a listening for oppression if we haven't experienced it ourselves. And we have a great potential to create ourselves. And we have to now really fundamentally recreate ourselves as a human species, because we've been divided against ourselves and against each other. And it's as Mazin says, we've only got a few years left to get it sorted out. So we can't go into psychotherapy or anything. We won't have time to. We just have to start creating ourselves anew, and being the change we want to see.
Jim, I'm gonna push back a little bit, and not in a negative way, and with loving intention. Because the situation, as I understand it in Ireland, it's white, right? It's white. There isn't so much the element of white supremacy as there is in Palestine or in the United States. The only reason I bring that, because, for example, in the United States, that idea of creativity, in the United States, Black Americans are very much, unfortunately, cut off from ourselves. There's a certain self-disenfranchisement that comes with race-based oppression.
Yeah.
And especially you see in the United States, because it necessarily is going to come out, and that's the beauty and also a tragedy of hip hop, of rap music in the United States, is that it necessarily has to be constant rebellion. It has to be constant resistance and opposition to the quote unquote lofty idea of your oppressor. And unfortunately, that very much has to do with skin-based loftiness and innocence and what's the word? Yeah, but loftiness. I think that pretty much says it. But there's just the history, and to fight against that, hip hop is kind of a natural revolutionary expression against this. And what it, unfortunately, it's been bought out by corporations and stuff, as you know.
Yeah.
But it's just, I think that's a big difference when the skin, when race or skin privilege come into it.
Yeah, I just tell you, like, I mean, I know there's someone on this call who really experienced it as well when she grew up in England, but like in England in the 50s, the signs were no blacks, no dogs, no Irish, and so like Irish people have been the recipients of racist oppression since we were colonized by Britain. So it goes back a long way too. So, but I'm not saying, like, I'm not equivocating the two things at all now, because you know, the island of Ireland has, you know, most of it has got some sense of itself, and it's changing. But it's actually, what the sad thing about Ireland, it's a bit like Israel in the sense that Ireland wants to take its place in the, you know, instead of freeing itself and changing the whole system, which is what we need, Mazen, it just wants to become part of the nationhood of the world, you know, and just become, it wants to let America use it as as an aircraft carrier for bombing Iraq or wherever it wants to bomb. And you know, so it's a real difficulty that we don't want to grow in the direction of a rapacious, racist, settler colonial, capitalist, patriarchal system. We want to grow into an us and us word, not an us and them word. And so, yeah, it's we need to transform the world.
If I may just interject very briefly here, there's a book I highly recommend by a Brazilian author by the name of Idilbar Avelar, called The Letter on Violence of Violence. It's essays relating to violence and race and so forth. It actually, this was published 2004, and I got it as a gift from the author when I met him in Houston at the time. And it's a remarkable book in telling us some of our history, and it relates to what you guys were talking about earlier. It turns out, for example, the concept of democracy and elections that came out in Greece, the reason they developed it to have elections in Greece is to distinguish slaves from non-slaves. And just so that you know, at the time, the slaves were white people from the other islands of Greece. So to distinguish them, to give them a mark, basically, to say that these guys cannot vote, cannot be part of our society, they're here to serve us. This whole concept then started in the Western world as a method of distinguishing people, categorizing people. And he explains a lot of these things in his book in terms of the origin of violence and the use of violence in the West and how it originated. So violence against the lower class is not necessarily a color issue. It's an issue of who is in power and what they want to do with this power. So in Northern Ireland, for example, the British government over the past few hundred years had an agenda which was oppressive to the people of Northern Ireland. That was clear. And I think you can find the same repeat in other places. But the connectivity here is very important for us to point out. How do we connect these dots? And how do we understand the connectivity, let's say, of the struggles in Northern Ireland or Black Lives Matter in the US and Palestine or the lower castes in India? I was invited to India, for example, to speak one time 3-4 years ago in Mumbai. Mumbai has like 1 million people living on the streets in abject poverty, and there's a lot of people who are very rich in India, very powerful, including Modi and his henchmen, basically. And they invited me to speak about Palestine. And the reason for that is very clear, because our oppressors here in Palestine and their oppressors are that class that we need to fight. Let me repeat this. The oppressors are the same. They have a club, and it's a club that they enjoy befriending each other. Modi of India is a good friend of Netanyahu in Israel and is a good friend of Trump and those guys. They are a club, or of Johnson in the UK, if you want. They're a club. It's a club of elites that are profiting from what? From our misery. And so it is really essential for us, the modern classes, if you want, to get our act together. And the best evidence of this, maybe you know this, maybe you don't, but the police in Minneapolis came to Israel to train. They came to Israel to train. The guy who kneeled on the neck of this guy, George Floyd, this racism, this mentality is derived from cross-educating each other in racism, cross-educating each other. I was knelt on my neck, by the way, by an Israeli soldier here. It is inherent in the methodologies and in the mentality of the oppressor. And we can talk about the mentality of the oppressor ad hominem if you want. But to me, it's very, very important also for us to examine our own attitudes and our own approaches to life and what we do and how we do it. Because as many people have argued before me, we have to free our mind first. In the South Africa, Stephen Biko once said, the best weapon in the hand of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed. If they control our mind and make us feel subhuman, they have succeeded. Also in the civil rights movement in the US, there was a saying, free your mind and your ass will follow. So we've got to,
True.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's and just to pick off on that, I pick up there. Earlier I should have added a context because Jim, maybe that was unfair for me not to add the context. I guess I was speaking more so of from my experience, but more from more modern history, right? For instance, Marx, the most basic principle I remember from Marx, or I think everything comes from in Karl Marx, is that that capitalism's drive is the essence is conflict between us, between that connectivity, as Mazin was saying, and as Jim, as you've also been saying, but the one thing he missed, because that was largely, it wasn't exactly pre-colonialism, but I think he didn't begin to see the dissipation of colonialism and the pushback against colonialism. And what we're dealing with in the United States, and now also in Palestine, I believe, maybe not so much in Palestine, I think it's a little different, but definitely in the United States, is a racial caste system. And that's conflict, that's that conflict taken to another level. And that's more of what I'm speaking from, because that the racial caste system is, creates that, or maintains that conflict between, race-based classes and race-based racism. And because of that, it's just maintaining that conflict. and what it does to us, but just the fact that it separates us so much. Again, the connectivity, as you said, there's been times, time and time again throughout American history, even, from the Bacon's Rebellion to labor movements and beyond, there's always been Black-white solidarity. Pre-slavery in the United States, there was Black and white indentured servants who lived in community until they were separated by the merchant class, the elites. Right, and that solidarity was broken down, and poor whites wanting to better themselves because they were living in total squalor, decided to take the opportunity, right? Take the opportunity to be above and to see, their just yesterday brothers being pushed down into subhuman bondage, and that's racial caste system. And just want to clarify that from my statement earlier.
I just wanted to, oh, Jim, did you want to respond to that? If so, you've got to unmute. Otherwise, I'll ask another question, but unmute yourself.
I'm just going to add to the conversation the work of Paulo Freire, who basically said that there was two forces in the world: humanization and sectarianization. And I think, to take the rappers who say, rage against the machine, we need to rage against the machine we're in, but not rage against the people that are the agents of the machine. Even hate the machine, but not the people. Keep humanizing even our enemy, even though they dehumanize us. The agents of oppression, I think, this for me is an important thing in our situation in Northern Ireland, where there's very, very little that separates a unionist and a nationalist, an Irish, a person who identifies as Irish and a person who identifies as British, in terms of class, in terms of their status and their precarity inside the capitalist system, except this arrogance that they're better than. But if we don't use the tools of humanization against the weapon of sectarianization, then we can't transform the people who think they're our enemy into our allies. And that was the brilliant work of Martin Luther King, and his real grip on nonviolence, which I am completely wedded to as the tool for transformation. We can't change this through violence anymore. We're out of time. Violence will be used against us. It will come for us, but we have to resist. We have to resist with nonviolence. I think that's my view on it anyway. This is really, really, really interesting. And we just came through a period in our country in the US, where we had an election where our choice was horrible and not so good, but none of it was really systems challenging. And I wonder, Mazen, actually, if you want to talk at all about the situation in Palestine now with the elections, whether people are seeing from what perspective are people seeing them, and what can we learn from that in our own struggles?
Well, I mean, there is supposed going to be elections. They may not happen. We don't know, but you cannot have elections, in my humble opinion, that represent the will of the people when you are under occupation and you allow only selective members of your public to participate in elections, being the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. There's even talk about East Jerusalem being excluded from participation. There are 13 million Palestinians in the world. 7.5 million of us are refugees or displaced people. So unless all of those people have a right to vote, self-determination, I think elections under occupation are meaningless personally. I may still participate and vote just despite the ruling parties. I may vote for a young group of Palestinian activists that are running to dismantle the system eventually. But we will see what happens. I think the bigger geopolitical questions are more relevant than the local elections here. which is to dismantle the whole system that led to the Oslo Accords, which are racist accords that basically delimited Palestinian autonomy to a certain segment of the population and a very small segment of the geography. To be precise, about 6% of the geography of Palestine. This is basically the problem, and I think we need to, again, not the issue of elections that matter. What matters is what happens to the people, how much they have pushed back, and we are trying to mobilize, and I hope to mobilize more myself this coming year as things go post-COVID-19. We have to go back to reshape a world that's not to recreate the world before COVID-19, but to shape a new world that is people-centered, that serves people and nature at the same time, which is why we started this Institute of Biodiversity and Sustainability, where we have community gardens, we have playgrounds for kids, we have natural history museum, exploration, encouraging people to think and criticize and work to produce a different world. It's not enough for us to keep complaining about politicians. We need to also get our act together.
That's beautiful work, Martin. That's beautiful work.
Thank you. You're muted, Felice.
Yeah, that's probably a good thing. But but I was wondering if Fanon would like to talk a little bit about the efforts in Kingston to create the world you want to live in.
Oh, Kingston's it's an interesting liberal kind of somewhat progressive, mildly progressive bubble in New York State. But the interesting thing about Ulster County is that it once held the most Black African slaves in the northern colonies. So it's kind of ironic, and I think it's very telling. It's very telling in the sense that, on the surface, for example, Warren Buffett, the Novo Foundation, gives a lot of money into activism in Ulster County. I think other parts of New York State too, but I live in Ulster County, so I'm just focused here. But there is some pushback against things like gentrification and police violence, and there's a lot of support. There's a lot of positive support, and sisterly and brotherly and loving support for the work, for those efforts, in all earnest. And yet it's often destabilized. It's often destabilized by the source of some of the funds, unfortunately. But sorry, back to some of the work that I do. We have a great education justice committee, and right now we've recently won foundation aid, which is really money to supplement the inequity in schools. And this was won largely thanks to a group called AQE, the Alliance for Quality Education. So, and AQE kind of came out of Citizen Action, but AQE is definitely its own entity, very strong group. And it's all Black led and Black femme led. And so that's really beautiful group. And the work that we're trying to do now with that money is just to make sure that it's really representative of the community. Because of course, we need more teachers who look like the students that are being taught. Because that's, of course, the beginning, because the miseducation is huge. The miseducation is huge, and being told being taught more culturally responsive education is huge. So that's one of the things that we do in Kingston. We also work really hard against bail reform previously, so that people weren't lingering in prison for inability to pay bail, which if you have money, you can very easily pay your bail and be out of jail the next day. But if you're poor and you can't afford it, then you're just gonna linger in jail, sometimes for months, sometimes for years, sometimes for decades. So we do a mixture of different work, criminal or justice reform work. We don't use the word criminal. So justice reform work, education reform work. But at the same time, I just want to emphasize that there is a lot of destabilization that we experience constantly, constant destabilization, and that much of the work is still very much tainted by the structures that we live in. The structures that we work in. And I'm curious to hear. I don't know if Felice that's on the agenda, but I would love to hear if Jim or Mazin experience the same thing. But the organizations that work in the United States are often destabilized, and it seems very much so often to be from the folks who are philanthropists who are donate their money, which therefore almost makes it seem like an extension of white supremacy through funding of these organizations. So it's a constant effort, and it constantly makes you reassess. And I think reassessing and processing how to negotiate that maintaining the status quo, or just kind of maintaining not so much the status quo, but maintaining the structures that help to keep the racial caste system in place.
You're muted there.
I said we had said we would bring this to a close at 3:15, which it is. I think the point you brought up, Fanon, is really important. I know that it's a big factor in Palestine. And maybe I would like to give Mazen just a minute to answer that, but then we've had a wonderful audience of 52 people. We've had a lot of interesting discussion in the chat. So I think that maybe we would end it with Mazen's response to what you had to say. You have to unmute too, though, Mazen.
What was the thing?
Okay.
Yeah, the issue of, external, Palestine has the highest number of NGOs per capita in the world. They're both for the Israelis and for the Palestinians. And there is agendas that are driven by the World Bank, the IMF, and others that make sure that we remain within the neoliberal mentality of consumerism, not what the people need. This is understandable from the perspective of the funders and what they want to achieve, which is to make us more subservient to the interests of the elites that run this world. And I think, again, the pushback has to come from the people. So I urge us, every one of us, again, to look at what we are doing as individuals, look at ourselves in the mirror and say, where am I from this? How am I behaving? What am I doing? Am I contributing to the system, or am I challenging, bucking the system, so to speak? And I think this is where, the good thing about international collaboration, I don't like the word solidarity very much, because solidarity, implies that it's somebody else's struggle that you are joining with. It's really our struggle, whether it's, the pipelines in the North America and the US, or Black Lives Matter, or the Palestinian struggle for self-determination, for freedom, or anywhere else in the world. It's one and the same struggle. We're all human beings after all. I mean, it's just an accident of birth that I was born here, and Zohar was born here also. And so we are together in this country, but we could have been born somewhere else like the rest of you. So it's an accident of geography and birth, and of course what we know about our area here helps us, so we can struggle with our knowledge. But ultimately we have to always, as the old cliche saying goes, you know, think globally and act locally. I would say think globally and act globally also. But that's all.
Well, I really want to thank you all. Thank you, Mazen. Thank you, Fanan. Thank you, Jim. This is really such an interesting discussion. And there's a lot more to take off from here, because I think if I were to sum everything up, we need to free our radical imaginations and in order to deal with the situations that we face. I just want to
share
remind
with
you.
us the link, Felice. I
Yeah.
saw your recording.
Yeah,
Because there were some people who would love to hear this. So if you can
definitely. I
send us
wanted to
the
say
link.
this is being recorded, and we will send out a link to everyone who was registered to be part of the discussion, and that includes the panelists. So I want to thank you all so much. Jim, have you want to add something?
I just want to add one thing, given it is, other people will be listening to this. It's something that was said by a professor in Sao Paulo University, that the fundamental racist split, the big racism comes from our sense that we are separate from nature. Once we start to see ourselves over and above nature, it's inevitable that then we subdivide ourselves into, you know, us and them. And it's a very, very important thing that, as Mazen says, we're a species now. We've got 6 or 7 years left to kind of have some kind of a future for the next generations, whether we're black, white, Palestinian, Israeli, whatever way we identify right now. We have to start to identify as human beings and work together for the good of life on earth. That's the project, but it's going to take a big challenge for all of us. And as Mazen says, we have to look at not just the people who have power over us, but the way we use the power we have and use it much more smartly, much more smartly. Yeah.
Well, thank you all very much. And take a look at the recording when it comes, and please share it, because this was a completely valuable conversation that other people should hear. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you, Mazen. Thank you.
Thank you for the conversations.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Good to meet you. Bye.
All right. Bye, Mazin, Jin. Please, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Please email me and let's stay in touch.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
I'd love your emails, actually. It'd be great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks, Felice.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye.